There's often a lot of talk about double standards between the sexes, and this is nothing new. We've encountered this time and again. Some examples of this are, for instance, the fact that men, on average, are permitted to have a higher body count than women in terms of their sexual encounters, and there are a lot of reasons for this. There's things like paternity assurance, the fact that for a man, in many cases, having a high body count is a sign of prestige, the fact that women are attracted to him increases his status, etc., etc. Or, for example, that on average, men quote-unquote earn more money, although the whole wage gap thing is a bit of a meme at this stage. Of course, men work harder on average, they work more, they work longer, and they're also pursuing professions that pay better, frankly speaking. And people talk about double standards across the board, right? Fundamentally, the issue at hand, though, is that, yes, there are, in many instances, double standards. But the double standards are not the byproduct of some malice or some desire to hold women down, or really anyone. There are quote-unquote double standards because people, on average, are not the same, and men and women, on average, are not the same. So another instance of this would be the fact that a woman's education, her status, is on average very uninteresting to a man. As the joke tends to go, no guy ever got off on a woman's bank account. And a woman enumerating her list of qualifications, her master's degree or PhD, these things are also not a turn on. What they do is solidify things that are already there. So in a sort of mating context, of course, you might have a guy who initially is attracted to the woman because she just looks good and she seems reasonably smart and all the other stuff comes together. But it's not a primary point of attraction. Is it a double standard? Kind of, sort of. But rarely do we examine why these double standards exist. And the main reason why we don't is because of how we look at the world and how we understand our place in it. The main issue is what I would describe as a diachronic versus synchronic issue. Now, I'm borrowing these terms from linguistics, but it's useful. Diachronic means across time, from dia and chronos, and then you have synchronic, which means within time or with time. So a diachronic view of anything is when you examine changes that take place and occurrences that occur over a long period of time versus a synchronic view, which is only contemporary setting. Our general view of human behavior, indeed social psychology as it exists today, is almost entirely synchronic, which is to say it almost never takes inventory of our evolutionary past and how that evolutionary past has informed us and our current behavior. Culture does not emerge from nothing. I've said this for years. You know my example that I always cite, that the dinosaurs have a culture. Well, probably not. Brains were too small, etc., etc. They had a biology. They had their instincts. A culture? Probably not. When we don't look at human beings within a diachronic perspective, what happens? You look at them in a vacuum, and you look at quote-unquote double standards like body count, quote-unquote wage gap, and a host of other things as somehow incomprehensible and, more importantly, unjust, because it doesn't fit into a modern narrative about ethics and how things are supposed to be. How things are supposed to be are not how things are. And when you have entrenched, almost intractable human behavior that is the byproduct of millions of years of mammalian evolution, then you end up in a situation where indeed men and women are just very, very different. So let's take the example of the quote-unquote wage gap. Why do men even strive to make lots of money and achieve status? It's because of women. Without women, most men wouldn't be striving for status and money because that's what women want. Men do what women want, ultimately. Women's bank accounts don't turn men on. They don't need to ascend the ladder of the hierarchy. They don't need to achieve and strive to the same degree. They can do it, but there's no reproductive reward for it. Men don't care about that sort of thing. We understand this because we understand how human beings have evolved, where we come from, how we've gotten to where we are right now. But if you just look at it in a vacuum, it's perplexing. It's puzzling. You just don't understand things anymore. So I would argue that overwhelmingly we have a synchronic view of things. It's how we look at our behavior, how we look at just about everything in the human sphere of interest. But the point I'd like to make here is that that's not an absolute necessity. One of the things some longtime subscribers might be familiar with was my very early talks about the necessity of education about evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. There's a lot of talk about reforming scholastic curricula, and most of it is just about practical matters like how you can file your taxes, something very pragmatic. Well, I'm going to make the argument here that a diachronic study of human behavior is a pragmatic thing to learn about and to study. Because as much as we're hardwired with these instincts, we can learn about them. Within certain circles, these for example, none of this is a grand mystery. Nobody is perplexed about why men strive to achieve status and money, or why a high body count for a woman is a turnoff to a man. These are not perplexing things if you've learned the basics. But nobody learns these things. We don't teach this. We live in a synchronic world when it would be to our great advantage if we learned, when it comes to human behavior, about a diachronic interaction with the world. That is a huge difference. So theoretically, it is entirely possible to create a cultural narrative, if you will, that enjoins people to learn about this from, I don't know, junior high school onwards, to use an American example. That doesn't just teach the basics of mathematics, reading, but also the basics of human behavior. Because so much of the political ideology we have today, the whole feminist movement, for example, is predicated on a lack of understanding of human biology and our evolved history, and all the adaptations that went into that. It is predicated on a misunderstanding of what human nature is. Imagine if for the last 100+ years we had had a robust education in evolutionary biology and psychology. Imagine that. And everyone was inculcated with this. These misunderstandings, these misapprehensions would probably not have been there. Feminism might never have taken hold. Now, admittedly, it is true, changing the cultural zeitgeist at the moment is something that is, well, nigh impossible. But the fact of the matter is you can change culture. It is possible to some degree, even though culture ultimately is a byproduct of our biology. And learning about how humans actually are and interact at an early age, if this were to become part of the mainstream of education, would be hugely beneficial and would dispel a lot of the illusions and the ideology that permeates the world today. Is it likely this is going to happen? No. The next best option is online education, which is not amazing. It's hit or miss, right? You learn things online as an individual rather than something being part of a core curriculum. I would vastly prefer this to be part of a core curriculum so people aren't puzzled about these things. I don't know why, for example, evolutionary psychology has to be some rarefied subject that people shun and find really strange, that can only be found in university courses. But it's about us at the end of the day. Surely it's pragmatic and important to understand how we function as human beings. So many of these misunderstandings, these conflicts of interest, the accusations, and the list goes on and on. So much of this could be cleared up if we only had that basic understanding of what it means to be a human being, how we tick and how we function. But it requires time, energy, and education. Otherwise, we just operate in synchronic mode, and we end up in a vicious circle, as we currently find ourselves right now, even as I speak, where the knowledge about human behavior and our evolved history is vilified and viewed as insane, incorrect, and conspiratorial. It doesn't have to be that way. So here's the hope that at some point in time in the future, This type of education, evolutionary psychology and biology, as it applies to human beings, becomes its own subject in school that people study and learn about from a relatively young age, say 12, 13 onwards. So they're not surprised by the things they observe in the world. And no kooky ideologies emerge that try to transform the landscape of humanity unnecessarily, one could argue. Anyways, as always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Take care. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.